puppy isn't just for Christmas, and neither is a learning management system. So if you want to avoid being sold a pup by a LearnTech vendor that turns out on Boxing Day to be a bit of an old dog, then listen up as we initiate you into the way of the fox. Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what? Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool.
If you do online learning in your organisation, and let's face it, who doesn't nowadays, you'll need a learning management system of some kind. Most organisations have at least one. Many have several. But are they happy with what they've got? Hack facts.
According to research from Fosway Group, only about a third of learning professionals believe their learning platforms are fit for the modern workforce.
Meaning 2/3 don't.
And the majority are expecting to change them in the next 2 to 3 years.
So how are those disappointed buyers going to avoid making the same mistake again? My guest this time on The Learning Hack is an independent consultant who helps her clients to become better buyers of learning systems. Laura Lee-Gibbs heads up a digital consultancy called LearnFox.
Foxes are vermin.
Here we go.
Foxes should be hunted down and killed like foxes.
Look, cynical Bambino, the season's well over, so hack off.
It's that election result. He hasn't been the same since.
Saboteurs. Antifa saboteurs.
LMS or LXP, open source or proprietary system. How do you avoid getting bamboozled by marketing BS and make a good choice for your learners? Laura calls her approach the way of the fox. She has a 3-step process to help people sidestep the crap and get the right system for their learners, that she explains in this interview. She's worked client side, she's worked vendor side. Between us, we know a fair bit about where the bodies are buried. So if you're looking to buy or replace a platform, or if you're just someone who's interested in the dynamics of the learning technologies market, you're bound to get something from this discussion. Hello Laura, welcome to the Learning Hack. Thank you very much for taking the time today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So can you tell us first of all how you came to be involved in the learning industry or the profession and what your company LearnFox does?
Yes, of course. So my journey into learning has been more of a serendipitous kind of chain of events really than ever having been really very pre-planned, and it's quite funny because actually I've ended up being the client, the vendor, the trainer, the platform manager, and so I've been really all stakeholders. And when I look back, it all kind of started when I first did my degree, which was in applied psychology and computing, which back at the end of the 90s was quite kind of a bit progressive and futuristic, and it was all around the way the two disciplines overlap. It's all about human computer interaction and computer mediated communication, so very much about how people use technology to learn and interact. After that, I then trained to be an ICT teacher in secondary schools and was a terrible teacher. I realised that I didn't want to be in the classroom. I didn't want to be doing the whole behaviour management aspect of it. What interested me was how people learned and using technology to enable that. And so the turn of events meant that I ended up working in e-learning and working in the NHS and actually implementing an LMS across 3 NHS trusts. And that was really how I got into learning technologies in the corporate world. And from there, I went on to work for the vendor who had provided that LMS that I was implementing. And back then, the company was really small, so it's Calidus. Back then, they were called E2Train, which is a bit of a sign of the times. And I was one of only 2 professional learning consultants delivering all the professional services. So I literally wore every hat. I was project managing LMS implementations across dozens of organizations and configuring them to meet their business needs, training people on how to use the LMS, and learning a lot in the process. It was a really great kind of start to my career, and learning so much about everything that's involved in LMS implementations. So now I'm an independent consultant, and LearnFox provides digital learning consultancy to organisations who are going through digital learning transformations. So we help develop the strategy to underpin the transformation, and also help with the selection of suitable learning technology tools and platforms.
On your website, you talk about the way of the fox. So what's all that about?
So the way of the fox is very much the values behind LearnFox. So it's basically we're a small team, a small boutique consultancy who provide a very bespoke service to clients. So we really take the time to understand the challenges that our clients face in L&D. And we tailor our approach to really meet that need. We use all of our combined and unique L&D experience to do that in the most astute and agile way, and believe that we can outfox any digital learning challenge that presents itself.
And outfox the vendors, perhaps.
Perhaps.
So one of the things you do is help people through the process of selecting the right learning system for their organisation. That's an important job, as we know, especially now at the moment when more and more people are going through a very rapid digital transformation. And you take them through a structured 3-step process. And I'd like to go through that with you as a way of helping people to understand, even if they're not using you particularly, how they can choose the right learning system. So the first of these steps is defining your business and functional requirements, rather dry language. But my sense is that this is an area that's changed fairly massively since the original design of the classic LMS was laid down in the 1990s. And it's worth remembering that this thing is getting on for 30 years old. With your experience of helping people choose the right learning system for them, can you give us a sense of this diversity of needs and how it influences product search?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I mean, it used to be that the main driver for a learning platform was always compliance, and it was very much an internally focused need, to meet the needs of ensuring compliance for an internal audience in the majority of cases. And what I've seen more and more lately is that it's much more that there's more organisations with external audiences. So what is sometimes called extended enterprise, where organisations have their customers and partners and wider networks that they're wanting to educate. But actually it's more than that. So there are the use cases of that, but also you've got organisations like charities with volunteers, for example, who they need to train and equip with the right tools, etc., and educate. And a client that I'm working with at the moment is an academic publisher, and their use case is different again. So they're producing training on peer review to an audience of academics, which in turn will increase the quality of their publications and raise their profile and brand amongst their end user audience as well. So that's quite different again. And then there's also organisations who are providing programs of education to consumers. So with more of a consumer facing platform rather than an internally focused compliance facing platform, there's a whole different set of needs associated with that, which are very different, because you've got things like e-commerce being factored in, and probably a high importance on the social feature set as well.
So given that huge diversity, which in a way puts a lot more pressure on the design of something that was created in a much more kind of rigid mould, what's the best way to go about defining those business and functional requirements? I mean, presumably use cases has something to do with it.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's starting with those use cases and looking at the user personas. So who are your typical different sets of users that are going to be using the platform and engaging with it? What do they each want from it? What are their unique set of motivations? Who are they? What are their challenges? What are they trying to do? And it's starting with that to really start to identify down the individual and granular requirements, really, and then organizing those into areas of functionality that would typically be recognizable within the various platforms that are available on the market.
So say you've done that bit, and everybody has, I mean, presumably this won't just be you as the consultant deciding, you'll have your stakeholders. Everybody in the organization will perhaps have their own ideas about what ought to be included in the system that you get. And you can end up with a massive requirements list, which isn't really a good way to go forward. So your next step is define your top criteria. So how do you do that?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. So in terms of having a lot of different stakeholders with, a lot of input into it, you'll have people with various different agendas in an organisation and different preconceptions about what they think is necessary and what is most important to them. And it's really about getting all of that out of all of those people's heads, getting it all into, one coherent set of requirements, and then going through a detailed prioritisation. So I like to use the Moscow method, so identifying the must-haves, the should-haves, the could-haves, and the won't-haves for this time. And what I find really useful is to get all the main stakeholders to actually go through this independently, so separately, so to really get a good honest viewpoint on where everybody's at, and then bring everyone together and go through where there are clear disagreements on the priority of different requirements. So those are the ones that need to be discussed and you need to get alignment on. And also there's where there's too many must-haves, because you can't have everything down as a must-have. You've got to try and pick what are your top criteria. It's really challenging and applying some scrutiny to, do you really need that now? Is that going to meet what you're trying to do? Do you need that in phase one? Is that something that could come later? Could that be achieved another way, perhaps? So is there maybe a different way of doing what you're trying to do? Because you don't necessarily need a platform with all the bells and whistles. You need a platform that does what you need it to do, and that hopefully will evolve with you and do what you want to do in the future as well.
And what part might digital transformation play in this? How might a wider program of digital transformation within an organization influence you in this business you have to do at this stage of prioritizing your needs for a learning system?
So, well, I think the importance here is that you need to take into consideration the maturity of your learning culture. So, it might sound like the most exciting thing to get the latest LXP that's on the market and implement it, put it out there, and hope that you get engagement from your audience. But if you don't have a mature learning culture and your users aren't used to kind of self-driven engagement, then that's not going to happen. You need more than just the tools and the platforms. You need a wider strategy to take you through the essential transitions of a transformation. And the first one to think about is really improving what you might have already in place, then moving on to starting to embed that culture and engaging and starting to drive that cultural change, and then turning your internal activists into your champions and really driving that with effective learning campaigns, activation campaigns. And with the improve part, where you need to start, it's really thinking, particularly with L&D departments probably having to tighten their belts, for their budgets now, it's really thinking, what can you do to improve what you've already got? If you've got an LMS, but it's not, there's not much engagement, it's not being, you don't have a lot of take up on it. What can you do to improve it? Is it actually being utilized in the best way? Could it be reconfigured, and could you maybe redesign some of the training programs that are currently on offer? Could you use different tools that you've already got in the business to really improve what you've got? And could you look at what kind of activation and marketing campaigns you could start to devise in order to really improve that engagement?
So all of that sounds like really good sense, and there's a strain there of kind of slightly reining back your ambitions in the light of the practicalities of the situation. But is it ever the case that you also need to prompt people to look a bit further forward? I mean, if somebody has a digital transformation strategy and they're looking at going to a certain place in the future, is it sometimes necessary to make them kind of, I'm not trying to put words into your mouth here, I'm just trying to cover some of the different kind of situations that can come up in this kind of work. Is it sometimes possible to make people look a bit further forward, say, okay, you're putting this in place for these needs at the moment, but there is a longer scale opportunity you want to grasp with your digital transformation, and it might need you to look a bit further ahead in how you define that requirement?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much about trying to benchmark where you're at the moment, and then look to where you're wanting to get to. So where are you now? What's the aspiration? What's realistic in terms of a time frame to go through those transitions to basically implement that transformation? And that's where it could be more about developing more of a 3-year strategy, for example, and then looking at the different stages that you need to go through on that journey, and starting to develop a bit of a program of work. And obviously when you're looking at any length of time ahead, you can't do that in a kind of overly prescriptive way. You've got to be fairly agile. But what you can do is you can get a strategy in place that highlights the different areas that you need to look at improving. And that could be, reviewing what platform you've got and deciding whether you might need a new one. But equally, it could be looking at all the different programs that are in place, how they're currently delivered, and better designing them with whatever tools you've got.
So you've defined your requirements, everybody's said what they want, and you've prioritized that and aligned it perhaps with a transformation strategy. Your step 3 is research available systems. So, okay, this is the point where the rubber hits the road in a way for when the vendor community gets involved. Now is the point where you know what you want, and it's time to see if the vendor market is actually able to give you something that will meet those needs. So this is a big thing. It's confusing. As an initial step, how would you approach dividing up the market so you can narrow things down a bit?
So this is a tricky one, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to be just having some kind of beauty parade of different platforms within categories that are coming from the marketing hype that you're seeing at the exhibitions or looking at online when you're doing your kind of desk-based research. I.e., you don't want to just go, right, we'll have some LMSs, some LXPs, because there's a blurring between the two, for example, and you don't want to kind of get confused, I guess, by the marketing hype. But you've got to bear in mind your use case and your different stakeholders, and there's probably some preconceptions and ideas that all of those stakeholders are bringing, and you need to think about where categories are suitable and really identifying what the kind of overarching pros and cons of those are, because you need to be taking your stakeholders on a journey through this decision process. So for example, you might want to think about an LMS and an external authoring tool versus an LCMS, so an LMS with an inbuilt authoring tool, and compare the pros and cons of both options so that all of the stakeholders really understand, what the different options are, because there'll be, you know, things like price and you know, as well as functionality and dealing with multiple vendors and things to consider. And it's you know, what the appetite for those different differentiating factors is within the organization, for example. And then another example might be, if you were looking at open source software, you might be considering a self-hosted open source option versus, you know, open source option with a partner, so as a managed service, and what the pros and cons are for both. Again, there'll be totally different kind of cost and resource factors there, but it enables all of the stakeholders to fully understand what the options are on the table, and to then look at, you know, vendors, you know, within each category, for example.
Experience.
It's everything that ever happened to you, everything that ever will. Experiences, both huge and not so huge, slowly add up over a lifetime to become your experience. Everything you know, everything you are.
Experience.
And now the experience word is taking over learning.
Learning experience.
Our learning experience.
Learning experience design.
Learning experiences.
And some worry that the change will distract from what science has told us about how people learn. Do we even know what we mean by the words learning experience? Is this a learning experience? Or this? Or this? I've talked to some incredibly smart designers, theoreticians, L&D practitioners and technologists on behalf of the good people at Learning Pool. And together we've created a series of guides and resources to help you get the best from this change. Download the first of these now, the Experience White Paper.
Experience.
Let's get into that thorny debate, LMS versus LXP. So your choice might be, do we need an LMS? Do we need an LXP? Do we need both? Or neither, maybe. Give us your view on that highly contentious question.
Yeah, and I think you know, I think this is where a lot of people start as well, and where a lot of confusion lies. And the answer, of course, is that it could be any one of those. It could be that you don't need either. It could be that you need both, or it could be that you need one or the other. But of course, as I mentioned before, there is a huge blurring of the boundaries between what an LMS is and what an LXP is. So, and a lot of this does come from the marketing. So a lot of LMSs that have been around for a long time are starting to market themselves as LXPs or LXP style LMSs. LXPs, the original LXPs that came onto the market were more of a user experience layer that went over the top of perhaps an existing LMS, that were just what the end user would interact with, and that would surface personalised content to them. So the likes of Degreed and Pathgather and Edcast, for example. If you have a large, complex organisation, you could well have the need for a kind of complex learning ecosystem. So Unilever, for example, the consumer goods giant, they have an LMS underpinning you know, various different things. So they've got lots of then content subscriptions, and it's all being surfaced to people via an LXP. But that's because, you know, they're a large, complex organisation. They're subscribing to lots of different content for loads of different types of audiences, and it makes sense, and they've got the kind of budgets that can allow that. If you're more of a mid-sized organisation, then you're going to want more of a one-stop shop that enables you to, you know, you'll just want one platform that can do everything that you need it to. In which case, you're going to be looking more at the LMSs or the LXPs that do some of the LMS type stuff. And this is where there is that blurring, because you've got LXPs that are more than just that user interaction layer and that actually manage instructor-led training really well now, and enable you to create learning pathways of different content and manage kind of qualifications and things. But then equally you've got LMSs that can do that are starting to introduce some of that machine learning recommendation engine side of it, personalizing the learning experience. So I think rather than get too concerned about LMS or LXP, it's about really taking it back to what you actually need and accepting the fact that there's a blurring of the line between those two, and ensuring that you're really understanding what the market is, what's available in the market, really.
That blurring makes it difficult for buyers, but I think it's worth sort of pointing out that it's also quite a difficult thing for vendors at the moment. I get the sense that a lot of people who have LXPs are building in LMS functionality as well to do the SCORM tracking and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And also that the LMSs have added their own kind of experience layers and so on. I wonder if it's harder for the smaller companies. If as you were talking about an enterprise kind of technology stack, which sounds very much like the kind of Bursin model there, for you have your LXP as your discovery layer, and then underneath that you have the LMS. That isn't necessarily the case when you have a smaller budget and smaller numbers, perhaps. You need to find everything you need in one system. And that means you have to kind of do a lot of not just tire kicking, but looking under the hood to see what things actually do to find the right system. Is it tougher, do you think, for smaller companies to make that decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where it's really useful to have all your requirements organized into functionality areas. And this is where it can be useful to get outside help, because initially, in my experience, when an organization starts working on their requirements themselves, they're not necessarily ordered or grouped into the functionality areas that, from my experience, I know is how the learning platforms kind of categorize functionality areas. So it's useful to do that, because then it facilitates all those conversations with vendors. Basically, you can look at those requirements, you can look at the priority of them, and it can be clear, for example, that your priorities are really good management of instructor-led training and the ability to manage complex qualifications, for example. Knowing that means that your top priority is not having a personalized recommendations and all of what LXPs can offer. But you don't know that until you've gone through that process, and you can look at what those requirements are telling you. So I do think it's really useful to kind of go through that whole process step by step and then look at the facts. And it might be that where you want to take it is down more of that personalized path. But that'll be once you've got more engagement, and that's on your roadmap, and that's where you need to make sure that what you're planning to do aligns with the roadmap of the vendor that you're choosing to partner with.
Of course, we should make some mention of the Fosway distinction between suites and specialist players. It's possible to take a very cynical view of that and say, actually, everybody's trying to do everything. There's no real dividing line between suites and specialists, and even what looks like a suite from the marketing point of view, when you look under the hood, well, all these bits have come together through acquisition, and some of them don't fit together. I have to say, I'm not naming any names here, but I have worked within companies which had a suite where the authoring tool didn't actually communicate with the LMS, although the marketing literature would believe you to think that. What's your view of that? Do you think there is, the suite really is a thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely think the definition of the learning suite versus the learning specialist, I think that is useful. I think it's probably more useful than the over focusing on LMS versus LXP, because with a learning suite, you can find a platform that can do everything you want. There'll always be, some, maybe some things that you've got to, maybe it doesn't do quite as well as you'd like, or, nothing can be perfect. So there's always got to be some compromise somewhere. But that's where your priorities come into play, because as long as it can cover off all your must-haves straight out of the box, no questions asked, then I think that's brilliant. What comes later in secondary phases and how you evolve the product will, to some extent, sometimes be determined by what vendor you've gone with. And hopefully, if you can have a relationship with that vendor where, as a customer, you have influence into their roadmap, it can be a little bit more symbiotic, potentially.
That brings us to the interesting question of vendor relationships, because when it comes down to it here, you're not just buying a product. In most cases, you're buying into a relationship. Customer service is really important. For every dollar you spend on a license for a product, you may have to spend 1 or 2 in terms of integration and ongoing service and so on. But there's also technology vision, which could future-proof a product, or quite the opposite. There's the roadmap, thorny issue of the roadmap. All these things come into the decision. So what tips do you have for spotting the right type of vendor who's going to be worth having along on your journey? What good signs should you look out for? And what are the red flags?
I think for me, the most important thing to look out for during the whole selection process are the human factors. So you're talking to lots of vendors, that ability to build trust and a relationship from day one is so important, because people buy from people at the end of the day. Although it's an organization buying from another organization, it's ultimately people buying from people, and you buy into the people that you're talking to. And if the salespeople can't be totally on it and understanding your use case and very engaged with what you're wanting during that sales process, I think that would ring alarm bells for me, in that what's going to happen, when you're tied into a contract with them, and you're not number one priority anymore. So for me, the vendor's ability to fully understand the use case, and not just kind of resort into over-rehearsed spiel, about what the platform can do. And a good example of this is and I've seen this happen a few times. So where you've got a slightly unusual use case, for example, an external facing audience instead of the internal typical compliance driven use case, if the vendor keeps on or the salesperson keeps on talking about managers and teams and compliance when you're having your demos, etc., it's just a bit too rehearsed. They're not actually thinking about what your use case is, and it's just frustrating, because they need to be engaged in what you're trying to do, and what your business objectives are, and ultimately what you're trying to achieve from the learning platform. So human factors is a really huge one. And I think a red flag as well is where you get salespeople that are overly bullish and aggressive. Real turn off.
Never met any of those.
But I think the second thing, as you say, is the roadmap as well. So you're thinking carefully about where you want to start and what you want to do as your first phase, and kind of what you're going to get out of the box, but also keeping in mind what you think your future requirements are going to be. And obviously you can't know that for sure, but you can have as good an idea as you can for now, because we know things change all the time. But what is on their roadmap at the moment, and how do their customers impact that? How customer driven is it? How do you as a customer input into it? How do you get visibility of it? And do they do things like have annual conferences or
user groups?
User groups, that kind of thing, to kind of get that input and really engage with their customers.
My experience of talking to product managers in vendor companies is that roadmaps are a nightmare. Because in your kind of roster of clients who use your learning system, you will have some very big, high spending, powerful clients, and their say about what goes on the roadmap will tend to be quite important. And then you will have a lot of other people who want other things which are different, may actually be a better impetus and spur for the R&D for your company and your technology vision, but often have to get overlooked in terms of who's screaming the loudest or what the largest number of people want and so on. It's a very difficult balancing act.
Absolutely. And it is, it's a constantly moving feast, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I guess even like your requirements, your future requirements, what you think you might need next year could dramatically change, as we've seen from what's happened this year. So I think it ultimately comes down to that relationship, that transparency over roadmap, etc., even though we know it will change and there's challenges to be balanced, but it's the relationship. It's so important.
Talking about the relationship, coming back onto what we're talking about account management and salespeople a while ago, I think there's another dynamic within vendor companies that it's worth knowing about. If you're a buyer, you may be intensely aware of it. Is that all the vendor companies that I've been in, there is this tension between what they call hunters and farmers. That you have certain salespeople who are great at going out and getting the business, but then tend to throw the baby over the wall, so to speak, once the business is won and you never see them again. And conversely, you have others who are farmers who are extremely good account managers and will stay with the clients to see them through the process of integration, getting the content in, making sure that the thing develops well as it goes along. And we'll spend so much time with the existing clients, they haven't got time to go out and buy any more. And this is a problem for management within vendor companies, I think. Do you see any of that as a factor in the selection process?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, when you get to the RFP stage and you're having pitches and demos from a select few chosen vendors, it's interesting. It can vary quite a lot as to who that salesperson might bring along with them to pitch. And I think it's really impressive when a vendor brings a few different people from the team. So you've got like a solutions architect type person, you've got an account manager, or the role of the person who's going to work with you through the implementation, for example, and you're getting a real flavor of that whole relationship, the holistic relationship that you'd be entering into. And it's not just the one person roadshow of the salesperson just selling, and that can differ quite a lot, actually. And I surprisingly, because it's so apparent being on the receiving end of the pitch that it works, having a small team representing the whole experience that customer is going to get from you.
And we should also say, beware of bait and switch. You'll have a kind of presentation during the sales process where the CEO of the company, everybody that you want to see, the CTO, they're all there around the table with you. But then the minute the thing's sold, you never see them again, and you have a young, fairly junior and perhaps not so knowledgeable person who's your day-to-day contact. So having a designated project management team is always a good thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, I think that's been a really interesting discussion for me, Laura, and hopefully really helpful to the listeners. If people want to continue to follow in your foxy footsteps, following those little steps through the snow to the hen house, I think I'll drop that metaphor now. What's the best place for them to keep up with what you're doing and what you're thinking about?
So they can follow LearnFox on LinkedIn or follow me on LinkedIn. So you can find me, Laura Lee-Gibbs, or Sussex LMS Consultant. You can find me that way, but also learnfox.co.uk. And, I regularly put blogs up and also share those on LinkedIn.
Thank you very much for taking the time today, Laura.
Thank you.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. Many thanks to Laura and to our sponsors, Learning Pool. The Learning Hack is completely independent and transparently funded by sponsorship. Please subscribe on your podcast platform of choice or on YouTube.
And don't forget to leave a review and a 5-star rating to help other people find us. You can tweet me at John Helmer or reach me through my website, johnhelmerconsulting.com.
Next time on the Learning Hack.
It's our last show of the season for the holidays, so I'll be looking back at some past shows, the highlights and the big themes that have emerged from all those interviews with some of the smartest people in learning. Don't miss it.
Stay foxy, learning people.
Now I finally get it.
Was there anything we left out?
I don't think so.
I can't remember the rest of it. That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. Many thanks to Laura and to our sponsors, Learning Pod.
Learning Pod?
Learning Pool.
Been drinking.
My name's Moira Rose.
Action.
That's all on the Learning Hack this time. Oh.
You, hello?